could be your pension. This could be your nest egg. This is the only woodland you have. And, it's palpable, just the upset that's there. It's not all pounds and pence. There's a time investment and a land investment in these forests.
It's great to be back with another Environment Edge podcast, and you're very welcome to the show.
With 24,000 hectares of forestry windblown as a result of recent storms, making up 3% of the total planted forestry in Ireland, where can forest owners go from here, and what supports and advice are available?
I'm Cathal Summers.
And I'm Deirdre Glenn,
your Teagasc Sustainability Advisors, and we're back for another Environment Edge podcast number 98, and here we go.
John, you're really welcome to the show. So, had some really wild weather events in the last couple of years, John, and the forestry sector seems to be very, very impacted, especially with the most recent storm, Storm Éowyn. Can you tell us a little bit how this has impacted the forestry sector in Ireland?
So Storm Éowyn, and I suppose it was preceded by Storm Dara as well, which also did a little damage before Christmas. So I would have to say it's been very severe impact. Recent figures, I think from last Thursday or Friday, would show that almost 24,000 hectares of forestry have been wind damaged. Now, while that might be only a bit over 3% of the total forest area, it's still very significant, particularly as it's almost half and half between public forestry and private forestry. So for a forest owner, obviously enough, if it's their crop, whether it's 10% or 20% or 100% damaged, it's still a very big deal for them personally.
I suppose, when there is this impact, is there anything that the farmer can do in particular? Like when you say impacted, are these trees that are knocked or levelled, or what exactly is going on?
I suppose starting at the very start, there's two types of forest windblow. There's endemic windblow, which is a couple of trees blowing down inside the woods, and maybe a pocket gets a little bigger. And what after Storm Éowyn, what we have is catastrophic windblow, which is very significant, widespread trees blown down. When we say windblow, then the trees can either be blown over or they can be snapped. Normally they'd be snapped at 3 or 4 meters in height. So if I had to choose the damage, I would choose windblown rather than wind snap. The windblown timber can be recovered. Wind snap, the value is significantly decreased.
And what trees, are there any particular species that would be more prone to snapping or falling or?
Not particularly. I mean, what you're looking at really is trees that snap tend to be very firm. So they're standing up to the wind itself and they're not blowing over. However, if you have 180 kilometer an hour wind and your tree is right in the middle of that path, it could fall over. But if it's very well rooted, it will just break. Okay, so I would say that the forestry that blew recently, the vast majority of it would be spruce because that's the majority crop that's out there. But broadleaves, individual broadleaf trees and broadleaf woodlands would also have been damaged, and other conifers.
And I suppose a lot of the forests will be in, say, upland areas as well. So you'd have a cumulative effect between...
Yeah, exactly. So if you had very high wind, if you had shallow soils, particularly if they were maybe peat soils, yes, you are increasing the risk.
Heartbreaking for the farmers, John, to go out and see this.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, I would say part of Teagasc's, response is a level of communication about what has happened and what to do, but also a level of compassion as well. I mean, this could be your pension. This could be your nest egg. And for large operators or Quilty, for example, they have other woodland, but this is the only woodland you have. So I've been at public meetings with farmers over the last couple of weeks, and, it's palpable, just the upset that's there. It's not all pounds and pence. There's a time investment and a land investment in these forests.
3%, John. I know it sounds like a small amount, but it's a fair bit across the country. And maybe this question is too early to ask, but is there any sort of a figure put on that, what that 3% is going to cost, or maybe we're way too early to calculate that, are we?
We're probably a little bit early at this stage, but we're looking at approximately 10 million cubic meters of timber.
Yeah.
that would be 2.5 to 3 times higher, or a fact, 2.5, 3 times more than the annual harvest that we have per year. So it's a very significant amount of timber. And as you say, it might be just 3.5%, but it's your 3.5%.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, it is, it is a very big deal. It is also, there's some variety, but much of the damage, I would say, is Connacht and the probably the border regions, North Leinster as well. But yeah, it is very significant.
I know, looking at a lot of footage over the last couple of weeks, it looks desperate from the sky of how much damage is done on some people's forests. If you're one of those farmers or landowners that wakes up after a storm like that in the first week or weeks, I would say, because like you have these big knocked forests now, and I suppose what are the first steps to take? Because you can't just ask someone in to clean up the place, because there's that 3% is a huge amount of land.
The first thing is, don't take steps into the forest. I would say safety first would be the first thing, and this is what we're promoting at the moment. They are very dangerous. There are trees at different angles. They're under pressure. Trees could continue to fall, which is a possibility as well, particularly with the rain that we've had over the last couple of days, is one issue. But the trees themselves that are blown over are under different stresses and strains. So I would say not to be out in the woods that much would be the first thing. Safety first. Second of all, I would say check your insurance if you have insurance, and maybe your insurance and provider can come out and bring an assessor out. Okay. After that, my recommendation is seek professional help. There are Teagasc forestry advisors across the country to be more than willing to talk to you. We've done a lot of work on a one-to-one basis on phone calls, but also meetings as well. And there are registered foresters. So, everybody's situation is different and everybody's site is different. And the response is going to have to be tailored a little bit depending on your own situation. Okay. After that, it's an assessment of the damage. How much damage is there? Now, I mentioned earlier on about the amount of timber that's done. That is as a result of analysis of Sentinel-2, the EU space agency, or the satellite agency, that are carrying out analysis at the moment. Individual farmers can actually access the Copernicus browser, and they can look in their own woodland and see what kind of damage there as well. Now, it won't be really micro damage, but it will give you an idea. So assessing the damage, how much is there. And like I said, it's not just the trees that are fallen, but you need to look at the trees that are at the edge of these woodlands. I don't know, do you recall the picture in the Irish Farmers Journal where you saw that it was the center of the wood was gone and the edge trees were still there? The edge trees were there because they were used to the wind, and therefore they were accustomed to it. But you need to take into account when you're assessing how much damage. If you take out the center of this, is there much left? Maybe those trees, the edge trees, may have to go as well. Okay. So there is guidance on how to look at this satellite imaging, and it is up on the Teagasc website, and you can access it through there. Okay. So that's assessing the damage.
You've kind of answered my question. I was going to ask you about can a forest be insured against storm damage? But if you've had several incidences of storm damage, are you still insured, or is it like with the flooding? You get one or two events and then you're not insured going forward?
I suppose it depends on what your contract says. Most insurance for woodlands are expire at 20 to 24 years of age.
Right.
So it's something that you need to check. It's a lot easier and cheaper to insure younger plantations. It's when they get older and more valuable, it may become prohibitively expensive, particularly for smaller areas. So it's something that you need to check in your own insurance contract, really, I suppose, more than anything else. Beyond that point, then, once you have an idea of what the damage is or how much trees are down or what needs to come out, there's the issue of the felling license. Now, the Department of Agriculture confirmed that you are required to have a felling license, even if the trees are on the ground. Possibly up to half of the forests affected do have felling licenses are in place, or they have had an application for a felling license put through already. Okay, so they should be okay. If you have a tinning only license rather than a clear fell license, you can ask for it to be amended, and what you need to do is you need to send in later on within the next 6 months a plan for replanting, because it is an obligation. When you clear fell, you must replant afterwards. Okay? For those people that don't have either a tinning license or a clear fell license, they can make an application into the department, and if they submit it and mark it as a result of Storm Éowyn or the recent storms, they will be prioritized. Okay, particularly before August the 31st.
Okay, well, that's good news. I think they took on extra people in that department, didn't they?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, in fairness, the task force, windblown task force, has been up and going, and it was one of the things that the minister had expressed a concern about in terms of getting the licenses activated and getting resources into that unit so that they can process them as soon as possible.
Is there a lot of this storm damage or windblown damage? Will some of that be taken up? A lot of it not get taken up this year at all. Like we're talking a long time to get it cleaned up. I'd say it's not going to be done in 2025. It says it.
No, well, the clock is running a little bit. I wouldn't suggest the farmers panic, but they do need to start moving in that the timber itself really needs to be taken up within 18 months of it blowing over.
Or starts to lose.
It starts losing its quality considerably at that stage. So, I wouldn't be running out next week, but I would start moving on making sure that the felling license, if you need road access that's built in, yes, it does need to be done sooner rather than later.
So you apply for the felling license if you don't have it, and you apply for the replant at the same time then to make sure.
What happens is, if you have a clear fell license, you've already put in details of how you're going to replant. Okay. If you've only a tinning license, well, then you don't have those details, but you can put them in subsequently within the next 6 months.
Okay.
Yeah.
And does the felling license, once you have that, is there a time limit on that, or is it just you have it until the trees are gone?
Well, normally there is a set time limit, but it can be extended. The Forest Service says they will extend it anyway.
There's different values then, I suppose, on the timber. So if somebody was unfortunate enough to have a lot of trees down at an older stage versus the thinning stage, there's a different value on those. And is there markets then to get rid of either the windblown material or even the thinning stuff that's been knocked?
There are markets. The issue is going to be that all this timber is going to come onto the market at the same time or within a short period of time. And you know yourself, if there's a surplus of a commodity, the price comes down. Okay. This is inevitable. Now, obviously everybody's keen that the market price would be sustained as high as possible. One of the issues also is going to be the availability of harvesting machinery. If you have 2.5 to 3 times the normal harvest comes down at the start of the year, well then we're not going to have enough harvesting machines to carry it out, certainly in a year period. So this is going to be one of the issues, and this is one of the things that the task force is trying to address now at the moment.
Should farmers group together to try and secure a market, or is there any scope for that within the sale?
Yes, forest owner groups that many of which Teagasc have set up do market some of their timber as a collective, in that they bundle different smaller lots available and then get a harvesting machine to cut them all at the same time. And there's economies of scale that makes it more attractive. And this is going to come into play later on as well. We're at the early stage yet in terms of the bundling, but I can imagine that, yes, that kind of bundle or cluster approach will be taken, yes.
Yeah, it's just a security net, isn't it, again? Very
much so. I mean, like I said, there are supports there in terms of Teagasc and others providing information, but there's also a lot of farmer-to-farmer knowledge in terms of prices that were offered, how did it work, is the person reliable, all of these kind of things. What we would say is, if you're selling the timber, you need to get a couple of quotes. You need to look around a small bit, okay? You need to have an agreed price. What is the price that you agreed? Is there a deposit? are there stage payments, as opposed to waiting till the very end. Okay. Other things would be, what are the harvesting procedures? Is there insurance in place? There's guidelines that have to be met as well. So it should be part of a harvesting contract. Okay. There's a good publication actually on the Teagasc website on steps and guide to getting timber harvested and what you need to put in place. The Irish timber growers have a harvesting contract, which is quite good as well. And it's available on the web. It's freely available. It would also be worth looking at. Okay. Outside of that, then, concern by many farmers, of course, would be, well, how do I know how much timber comes out? How do I know what I'm going to get paid for? And this should be addressed as part of the contract. Personally, I would suggest that if the timber is going to be on the ground, and it's likely to be so because it'll take a while to get to it, the timber should be sold on a volume, that's cubic meters, rather than a weight basis. Because the longer the trees are on the ground, and particularly if they're cut and stacked, they're going to dry out. So the volume might stay the same, but the weight will go down. So obviously you want to be paid by volume, not by weight, would be the preference.
Oh, John, who comes in and calculates? You're looking into hectares and hectares of forest. Like, who comes in and calculates that for you? It's obviously not the landowner. It has to be, is the buyer comes in and does that?
Normally it's the buyer. You get a registered forester to do the sales for you.
Yeah.
It's important to know the relationship. Is he selling the timber for you, or is he buying the timber off you? Either one works, but you want to know which one it is. Okay.
Yeah. That's
so
important.
It's rather important to be able to have that kind of accountability, I suppose, for want of another word. The other way of doing it, of course, is the harvesting heads on the machines keeps a record of how much timber it cuts and into what different lengths, whether it was saw log, whether it was pallet, whether it was pallet. So the forest owner can ask for a printout of that harvesting head and then match that against the timber that goes out. The docket system then at the gate would allow you to know how many timber loads went out and what was on. And of course, the timber goes across it goes across the weigh bridge at the mill, and it should correspond then to what was leaving.
Okay.
So there's a couple of different checks that can and should be done by the owner. Okay.
So it should be good. Just the way you're talking sounds to me, because machines are going to be on demand now. Sounds like prices to harvest might go up, and it sounds like timber price might go down because the market might be a bit flooded. But talk to me a little bit about maybe having sales contracts in place. Is there such thing as a timber sales contract that might be in place? And if there is, how will it work now when something's blown down before it's meant to?
There's a timber sales contract. If the contract has been signed at a given price, well, that is the price. However, how many people have a sales contract already? Probably not that many. I would say that once you start harvesting, or you're going to harvest, sales contract is important. And this is what I mentioned earlier on. The price, the payments, how it's going to be carried out, what's the site going to look like afterwards, stumps being treated with urea, that kind of thing. All of that should be listed out in the contract. It doesn't need to be a massive legal document, but it needs to be equitable, it needs to be fair, and it needs to be understandable. There's no point in having a contract that's so complicated nobody can figure out what's been said. Okay.
Yeah.
So
should we be thinking about say if it was a basic sales contract and you said I'm going to get such and such amount for trees that are 30 years old, should we have a little caveat in there to say in the event that there's storm damage that I get a certain price for maybe a 20-year-old tree or a 15-year-old tree?
That's kind of a hindsight thing.
Yeah, I know. For future, I suppose.
Great answer to that. I'm not sure about that one.
So say you're talking that, the forest has to be re-established. Are they going to give a time frame or additional time for farmers to get the wood out of the forests? I assume they want you to get straight back in to reforest.
Yeah, normally you would, because the cost of replanting is it's cheaper if you go back and replant immediately rather than leave it a year or two in terms of vegetation control or insect damage or that kind of thing. However, yes, understandably, the department does understand that things will be delayed. So the minister has given an undertaking that there will be some sort of pause until, and you can request it anyway, even under current system, that there will be a wait before you replant. No, that might be a couple of months. That's not a couple of years. Okay?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, but yeah. But there is a specific time period between removal.
Generally, there's a set limit, a set time that you have to do it, but it can be extended, yes. And
is there any work being done currently then in building resilience within forestry for the future?
There's quite a lot of work. In fact, Teagasc has carried out quite a lot of research work in terms of the Adapt for Resilience project, which is looking at tree species, forest management, and mitigation of kind of risks such as like thinning crops earlier, which would actually make it more wind resistant, not thinning at all in some cases. The species mix itself, whether some are more resilient than others in terms of being deeper rooting, like Douglas fir or Scots pine, or more adaptable to wetter sites and more suitable. So yeah, there is quite a lot of work being done in that. I suppose what else would be, there was the Wind Risk Project, which again was looking at rooting system with Sitka spruce. So yes, continuous cover forestry might mitigate wind damage, but I would have to say it's very site dependent. Okay, so it's not a panacea or a fix-all by any means. And having greater species diversity will improve the resilience of a crop, undoubtedly.
And John, maybe just to finish on a kind of a positive note, because it's been probably hard enough for anyone listening to this. Probably hard enough 20 minutes to listen to, because it is devastating for a lot of growers, and they're trying to figure out how to solve the problems and trying to come up with ways to be more resilient into the future, like Deirdre was suggesting. But you're sitting on the task force, and this task force has been fairly well publicized in the media. It's a high-level task force. What can we expect to see coming out of this task force to help landowners and farmers?
Okay, so the third meeting of the task force is actually tomorrow. That's Tuesday the 25th. So we'll be looking at the results out of the satellite imaging, and then addressing the licensing issue at that stage as well. Beyond that point, I suppose, Teagasc itself, there's advisors out there. We're running events. We have put out information out there on the Teagasc Daily. Today's Farm will be running an article next month. We'll also be running 2 events probably towards the end of March in terms of looking at the recovery and how we go about harvesting. We have a timber marketing event on the 15th of April in Sligo, which will address, obviously enough now at this stage, the felling issue associated with windblow. So all this advice is out there, okay, and it's freely available to farmers, whether or not they're Teagasc clients, actually. So what I would say is, for owners themselves, take a beat, have a pause, see what the situation is yourself, seek professional advice, and we can come up with a plan and move on from there. But there is advice out there, and there is support out there.
So pick up the phone to your local Teagasc office and ask for a forest advisor, and the help is there. It's just a matter of making contact. That's the main thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So get the advice before you do anything. John, that was a really interesting conversation. A difficult time for forest owners, but I'm glad to see there is options in place. And the main thing I'm taking from the conversation is, just like you said, sit back for a second, form a plan with an advisor, and try and implement that plan. So I think with that, thanks a million, John, for your time today, and I think we'll definitely have to have you on again to give us an update on how things are going with land and forest owners, and hopefully it'll be a more cheery conversation next time with high timber prices. All going well.
Hopefully.
Log on to the Teagasc website for more information on storm damage. An article called Managing Forestry Storm Damage can be found in the crops section of the website under Forestry. A report can also be found on the Department of Ag website called Estimate of the Extent of Damage to Forests Following Storms Dara and Éowyn. Tune in next time to hear more interesting chats and discussion.
Myself and Deirdre will be back in 2 weeks' time, but do give us a review on Apple and Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening to the Environment Edge podcast.